This is Mr. K's Don't You Know? And it's Chapter 2, Section 4. We're looking at the final river valley civilization in China. All right. As we've done with the other three river civilizations, we're looking at the geography of China. Now, looking at this land, relatively isolated, we do see deserts, mountain ranges, including the Himalayas, rivers that are deep with gorges, plateaus, and then you have the ocean. In ancient times, it was fairly difficult to get to China. Those were obstacle courses, per se. Looking at the land of China, 2/3 of it is mountains and deserts. So that leaves only 1/3, the best land, between the Wangho and the Yangtze rivers. That's where early Chinese civilization started, between those lands, or between those rivers. Just like the Nile and the Tigris and Euphrates have silt, we have this dirt called loess that was blown into the rivers by a steady but fairly stiff breeze going across the flat land, and it fell into the rivers. That's why the Wangho is called the Yellow River, because it's yellowish soil or yellowish brown soil. The Wangho at times is called China's Sorrow, or nicknamed China's Sorrow, because when it overflows, it's not uncommon for thousands of people to lose their lives. They can't get out of the gorge fast enough, almost like flash floods. The rivers provide not only water for irrigation and for drinking, but traveling into the heartland of China. The earliest civilization in China is under the Shang Dynasty. Scientists believe about almost 2 million years ago, man lived in southwest China. Unearthed skeletons they called Beijing man was dated back about 500,000 years. Again, theory of evolution. So there's an early presence there. The Shang Dynasty occurred about 3,500 years ago. They were the first rulers to leave written records. Now, that means that there were earlier rule, but the Shang were the first to leave written records. So we're going to say that's probably the earliest dynasty that history records. They were divided into social classes from the top to the bottom, nobles at the top, peasants at the bottom, with an emperor. And their culture was centered around family and respect for one's parents. Later on, we're going to talk about Confucius. He talked about filial piety. You owe your parents respect because they are your parents. So family was the center of Chinese society, and it hasn't changed much. The men dominated society. The elder men controlled the family. They ruled the roost, and women were treated as inferiors. The women stayed home, took care of the kids, and the men were politically dominant. Sorry, gals. They had a religion. They believed that their ancestors had the power to bring them good or bad fortune. Think of Mulan. This little dragon, Mushu, was summoned by the ancestors to protect Mulan. Okay, well, that's a good story. But the spirits supposedly were around. Great Aunt Tilly is dead, but her spirit is still around, and we need to make sure that she's not angry, so we offer her offerings of oranges, a bowl of rice, a candle, burning incense, etc., etc. They believed they could talk to the spirit world with oracle bones. They would write on animal bones, throw them into the fire, and then they would be brought out, and the priests would read the cracks and to ascertain the will of the gods. Their writing system There's no links between the written and spoken language of China, so it's possible to read Chinese without being able to speak it because of the different dialects. All parts of China could learn that same system of writing, despite the language difference. The problem was they had over 10,000 characters in their, I don't say alphabet, but their language. So it was very difficult to learn how to read and write. To be barely literate, you needed to know 10,000 or 1,000 characters. So not many people learned how to read and write in ancient times. The Chinese were involved in bronze working. You know, bronze is tin and copper melted together. It's very strong. Silk weaving and cloth production. Silk comes from a cocoon of a silkworm, and there is very delicate cloth made from that. So we have a very advanced civilization here. After the Shang, we have the Zhou Dynasty, Z-H-O-U, the Zhou Dynasty. Now, they were overthrown. They were folks that overthrew another family, the Shang Dynasty, and they claimed the right to rule. And they justified the rule by saying we have better methods to rule. They claimed what was called a mandate of heaven. The gods told us to rule, and we have divine approval. And if the people accept it, then that's okay. We have what's known as a dynastic cycle. Dynasty, a rule by a family. This explains why families rose in power, declined, and then were replaced by other rulers. This dynastic cycle lasted from ancient times all the way into the early 1900s, and then finally it was done away with. China was a fairly feudal empire. Now, feudalism is nothing more than an exchange of land for loyalty, protection, and goods. I give you a chunk of land, you give me loyalty, you give me goods, you give me protection. And that is typically what we see in the Middle Ages for Europe. Okay, so we have the emperor at the top and then peasants at the bottom, and these landlords grew more powerful than the emperor and less dependent on the king because they were more powerful than he is. And they would fight each other for control of neighboring lands. They were just like anybody else. They were greedy. They wanted more. The Zhou Dynasty introduced coined money. They melted it in the fire, iron ore, and they made money. Now, their coins look like tools, like straight razors, toad stickers, etc., etc. But it could be used as a tool or money, and trade was improved. They developed blast furnaces to produce more iron. And then finally, the Zhou Dynasty falls from power, and we have a period of chaos for about 300 years. China did not have a strong central rule. Warlords would fight each other, and with the chaos and destruction of traditional values, life was cheap. People would get killed for nothing more than greed. So it's amazing. China is very old. We're not even 300 years old as a United States, and yet they had a civil war that lasted for about 300 years. The next emperor is going to bring about a very strong rule, obviously, but that will be down the way. This is Mr. K's, and I'll see you down the river. Bye-bye.